So now that we have extracted the teeth that we didn't want, or let's just say that we're gonna do a wax up or something, I want to just go over setting some teeth, okay? And let's do it this way. Let's assume that this patient is going to get 2 implants, one in the number 6 position and one in the 8, and that they're going to get a bridge, and we want to do a wax up. But let's also assume that they don't like this tooth here and they want a new one of those. So I'm going to first, I'm going to first hide the opposing. So I just have this so I can see things a little better. And I want to first come in and do a single tooth. So if we go in under Mesh Mix, and here's our different libraries of parts, we want to either use the Pontix, which is going to have all of our teeth, or since we're only working in the anterior, we can come in where it says aesthetics. And then we can choose. We can say, okay, well, what kind of tooth do they have? And we have some options to choose from. I would say, maybe the square round looks pretty good. Like if you look at the central incisors of these versus these ones here, that one's not too bad. And then what else do we have? We have round. I would say we're probably not round. I happen to know that this is a male. Let's go ahead and go with the square. Let's do these ones. Okay, so this is tooth number 10. So we're going to grab tooth number 10. And what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to drop it right onto the model like this, because if you notice, if you drop it on the model, see how it kind of sticks to the model, which is not what you want. Okay, I'm going to hit cancel. Instead, what you want to do is you want to make sure to take that number 10 and drop it out here into the space next to the model, because then what it does is it creates the tooth out in this space instead of attaching it to the object. And notice how it put it way out here. Sometimes it puts it even farther away from the model, and you just got to deal with it. It's just kind of a funny thing about Mesh Mixer. One thing you'll notice that's annoying about doing a wax up in Mesh Mixer, and the solution I'm going to show you works real good if you've got a single tooth. And this was actually shown to me by a friend, Matthew Kahn. But notice how my arrows aren't aligned. One way you can change, you can create a plane, like an XYZ plane that's specific to one object, is with pivots. So if I go ahead and hit accept on this, and I come right here under edit, and we went over pivots before, but we go into create a pivot, and we take this and we say a bounding box, and we click on that. Notice how it's putting a pivot right in the center of that tooth, okay? And if we say, yep, that's where we want it, and we say drop that pivot and click done, but then we click on that pivot. I'm going to click, see this down in the object browser, there's a little icon that looks like the pivot. I can select that pivot and I can transform just the pivot, okay? And so I can come like this and I can turn that, so now my pivot is running in the direction I want to move my tooth, and I can hit accept. Okay, so that's how the pivot sits, which is great. Now when I go back to my tooth and I go to rotate it, now notice it's still how it was before, but if I click on the pivot, now it's aligned itself to that pivot. And so now that I have it aligned to the pivot, I can come right here and see how I can move it mesial and distally and buccolingually. And if it's like a posterior tooth and my model is aligned to the grid, not that big of a deal. But if it's an anterior tooth, especially like a canine or a lateral, like even 8 and 9 are fine, because if they're aligned to the grid, then they just happen to line up fine. But when you're turning this corner, that's where it becomes an issue. The downside with this is if I come off of that and then I go right back in, see how it doesn't automatically connect to the pivot? It'd be nice if the two were like locked together. What would be really nice is if we could change the library, like if we could attach individual pivots to these teeth and save them out as a library that way, so every time you brought it in, it came with the pivot, that would be great. But that's just not how it works. So if I'm looking at this from here, I'm thinking, you know, that's looking pretty good. The only thing that's not looking good is right up in here. And so I can go ahead and accept that, and then I can just change what's going on up in here. And an easy way to change is to sculpt something. And so I can come up here and I can take that tooth, and I'm going to first kind of overdo it a little bit, because then I can come back with my smoothing tool. I can shrink that size down a little bit, something like that. And I can come through and I can smooth this out. My strength is kind of weak. And I can smooth that. And I can just keep messing around with that until I've got what I want. Okay. So there are other ways of doing this, of changing the shape of an object. I'll show you one that works fairly well. Let me just go into my smooth again. Just going to smooth that out. Another one that works fairly well is the warping tool. And so the interesting thing about the warping tool is you can't select an entire object. So you have to unselect something. So I just do that. And then when you go in under deform and there's warp, notice that you can place these little warping points, and you kind of have to put them around in areas that you don't want to move, or else everything does move with this tool. But so notice right here that if I add one of these and then I grab it, I can also manipulate these objects by pulling on things. And sometimes that's a nicer, more controlled way of changing the shape of an object. Okay. And so I can hit accept. So now we're there. I'm going to hit 2 as my shortcut for getting back to here. They've got, where is it, the flatten tool, that if I want to flatten that out, it doesn't look as good as I was wanting it to, but we'll smooth it out in a little bit here. So those are just a couple different things that you could consider looking at when you're putting a tooth in, but you want to change the shape of it. Okay. So let's say that we're happy with that. I'm not. I don't know. There's something about it that maybe it's a little too sharp. Maybe the square wasn't the right choice. Maybe it's the round square that we want to go with. All right. I'm also noticing that these triangles are very, very small. And when triangles are small, let's reduce these a little bit. When triangles are small, they are very difficult to manipulate. And I think that's why when I was trying to smooth everything, parts were smoothing out a lot quicker than others. And so now let's try again, coming through here and just smoothing this out some. Sometimes when you get in, you start messing around with stuff, it creates odd contours that you don't really like. All right, so that's if you have a single tooth. Okay, let's say that we want to put in more teeth. This icon right here is not just a intro to this section. This actually is 6 teeth all connected together. And all right, so sometimes Mesh Mixer does this. I don't know why, but notice how when it brought those in, it brought them in huge. If you look right here at the sizes, it's, it's not right. We're talking 1,633 millimeters. I have no idea why it does that sometimes. I'm going to hit cancel and delete. But see how small that model was in comparison? I've never figured out why sometimes it does that. Okay. But when that happens, I just delete it and try again. And see how that time it didn't. So I don't get it, but it's free software, so you can't complain too much. So to see how it brought all of them in together, but we don't need these two. So I can click on this one, and this one, and expand to connected, and then delete. Okay, so those are all gone. And now I can take these, and the nice thing about it is I can move them all at the same time. So I can take them all, bring them into this space. And they look like maybe they're just a little too big, but I'm also seeing a size discrepancy. So, you know, this works really well if you're doing a denture and you want to bring in a full arch, especially a full arch in occlusion with the opposing, works really well. But when you're in a situation like this where space is tight, see how like this lateral is very skinny and that canine is pretty skinny, but the central isn't. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S and click these, not Control S, just S, and then expand to connected. And I'm going to transform just these two right here. And this is, again, where it gets tricky that these aren't on the plane we want them on. So I'm just going to shrink them as a whole, because I can narrow them up to be a little closer to the size that we're seeing over here. But then I can grab this one and stretch them out a little bit. That's gonna, for this patient, it actually works pretty good because that's how things look on this side. And then I can hit accept. And then after I hit accept, hit S again, double click on this tooth. Since it's all one color, that works fairly well, and then transform that. So notice, by doing this, they're all still connected together. And see this one, because this is aligned kind of to the mesiodistal, I could probably get away with just stretching it out and maybe lengthening it just a little bit. And I'm going to hit accept. If I don't want these connected together, I can either individually make them not connected, or I can come under edit and where it says separate shells, and it will create different files from them. So now I can do one at a time. And for some reason my computer's getting real laggy for some reason. All right, so I can come in here, I can grab this tooth, and I can try to mimic this one. Actually, let's show you another trick. I'm gonna get rid of this tooth. Let's say, and I know that we originally on this, we were careful to not affect this, but since we're doing, well, no, we should. Let's just ignore that for a second. Let's say that the patient didn't even have this tooth. Reason being, I just want to smooth this out a little bit to make it look just a little bit more natural. Okay. And what I want to do is show you how to take a tooth that's already there and mirror it to the other side. And so let's go ahead and let's do it like we do our extractions. Let's select this entire tooth. There's reasons I don't do this a lot. I'll show you that in just a second. But at times, when the teeth that you have as a free library aren't really doing it for you, I'm going to turn this off, and you are trying to just exactly duplicate what somebody has in their mouth, mirroring something is a fine way of doing it. All right, so I'm going to hit B, double click here, and so now I've got this tooth. I'm going to separate it. Okay, that's the Y. So now it's its own piece right here. I'm going to just make it all the same color. And then I can come under my edit and mirror the tooth. And if I left it like this with them touching, they'll connect the two together. I don't want them to. So I just want to make sure that they're apart from each other. And I'm going to hit accept. And then notice that they are still combined. So I'm going to double click on this one and Y again to separate. So now they're different. And these two right here, Y to combine them. And then I'm going to do close cracks to seal that back onto there. Okay. But now I have this extra tooth. And what I can do with this extra tooth, and I'm just going to hide some other things. I'm going to hit cancel. I'm just going to hide everything right here, including the maxillary. And what I can do is similar to what we were doing before, is I can bridge that. I can hit accept. I can come in right here, auto repair all. And now I've got, and we're going to go ahead and hit G, and then I'm going to do the erase and fill because I want to see if I can bulge that enough. And it doesn't always work because the bulging kind of goes to a point and then it gets all jacked up. So we'll just leave it alone, and instead we'll jump into our sculpting tool and we'll give it our own Pontic space right here. And just bulge that out some, like so. But then notice it kind of flipped some things inside out right there, which is not surprising. I can come through here and round that out. So now I've created a tooth that's a mirror of what they had. So now if I come back in here, hit escape, if I come back and turn all this back on, maxillary one, now I've got a tooth that's a mirror image. I hit T for transform, but now I've got this tooth that's a mirror image of the one next to it. Okay, and you can see like right up in here, it doesn't quite go up into the space that I had created for it, but also know that the space I had created for it was a bit arbitrary. If I wanted to, I could come back into the sculpting tools, into the draw, and I can add back some of that because maybe I realize that that's not exactly the shape it is. The alternative is I could adjust the tooth itself. Okay, so there's different ways that you can handle that situation, but that's how you could, copy a tooth. But then these other ones right here, we can hit Control or T for transform, and we can set some teeth here. So we got that canine there, and then A. So I've got my fingers 1 over A, 1 over T, because I can more quickly come along and make these changes. Maybe I made this tooth just a little too small. I'm going to change that. And this is where, notice how I'm trying to change the angle of that, but I'm not able to do it in a straight mesial distal direction. And that's where the pivot becomes nice. Okay. So that is setting teeth. When you're setting teeth, obviously at some point you need to look at the opposing and see where you are. Notice that this is not going to work right here. The way we wanted it to be is not quite right, even right there. Like this tooth from where the original was, it's really hitting into that lower. And if you want to see the occlusion really well, you can take your lower arch, make a copy of it by duplicating it right here, turn off the original, and then first what I would do is just select this, hit inverse, and delete all that extra stuff, which does make it so you can see right up in there, but you can take it one step further and you can say, well, I don't need all of this information, and you can come right through and delete stuff that you don't need. This is just a reference. And so I actually want to keep that, delete that. And so we don't need to worry about the roughness there because we're only using it to look up inside these teeth. We can come across right here, delete that. And so you can see that now we can look up in here, and their natural one looks fine, but all the ones that we've set are way too heavy in occlusion. So that's why it's always nice when you think you have the teeth where you want them to then go in and check, because we quickly see that we need to pull this tooth out. It's not always this difficult because people don't always have teeth that are in the way, but I can hit A, click here, then T. And as long as I can get these teeth pulled out enough that I can get past that tooth down below, I'll show you how we can, a couple things we can do. On how we can adjust things with a little bit more refinement. So we've preserved our incisal edges of those ones. And then let's come over here. This one, we actually had that pivot that we made, which is going to be useful now. All right. So let's just say that it's not a great wax up. So these are still heavy in here. A couple things you can do. One is you can you can go to one of your tools under sculpting. You can go to this draw tool, and remember, if you hold down Control, it pushes inward. That's going to be one of your more aggressive ways of getting in there and adjusting. Okay, if it's a small area, then you can also go in and smooth it out sometimes, especially if it's a cusp tip. Another way you can do this is with this brush right here called Attract, but we have to set a target to use that one. So the target would be this little piece that we have right here. Let me hit Escape. So this piece right here, if you set that as a target, and you can make it so your target's not see-through like this. So we can turn that off. So it's still set as a target, but we can see things better. Click on that tooth, and now when I go into sculpting and I go under the Attract tool, see how what it's doing is it's pulling the triangles to align with those. And now if I turn that off, I can see what it did. I can switch my tool to the smooth. And also remember that we have our secondary brushes. And so if you shift it, so actually if we left that on and we hold down Shift, then we can come along and smooth this out all through here. But then the tool's still on, and we went, okay, that didn't. You can kind of keep doing the two things. You smooth in between, but then you can attract it. Once you feel like you're done with the attracting tool, and I'm going to go ahead and hide that, you can come back into your draw, not drag, but draw. And I didn't mean to do that. I meant to hold down Control and push it in even further. okay? And then hold down shift for that smooth again. And so those are some options that you have. I did, you know, when we were doing the drag, technically the drag can work. You just have to be kind of careful, and you often have to end it by smoothing things out. I'm holding down shift right now to use it as a secondary brush. So those are just kind of different options. The other one you have is to actually, and we'll do this later on a different tutorial, is to take the opposing and to use it as almost like a cookie cutter, and it cuts into it by using a Boolean difference. I don't know how often I would just jump in to do that for a small case like this. There's just easier tools. But here, let me go back to this. I'm going to turn off the this one. We're going to click escape, click right here. And then if I took all these, here, let's do, I'm just removing the coloring from them, just so we can kind of see what the end result looks like. So I'm not saying that that's pretty. We just tried some things. I definitely myself would keep working with it and getting it to a point where I'm happy with it. But that is how you set like a single tooth, and that is how you move forward. In the next video, what I want to do is set a bunch of teeth. Okay, we're going to actually go to the other patient we've been working with, and I'll show it to you real quick. Let me just select all of this stuff here and hide it, and then we'll come over this patient here. Next video, I want to take on this case where we set all of the anterior teeth, upper and lower, just so we can kind of get more experience with setting teeth. Because in the end, when I first started with Mesh Mixer and I didn't have access to something like exocad, obviously exocad's going to be a quicker way to do a setup. But when I didn't have exocad, I did a lot of diagnostic setups in Mesh Mixer. And what I found in the beginning is surgical guides, which I use Blue Sky Bio for, and wax ups were the ways that I justified buying my first 3D printer, because I was able to save so much by being able to keep that in-house. And so I want you to really feel comfortable with setting teeth, because it's a great diagnostic tool, but then also once somebody accepts treatment, then you use that moving forward. And for this patient, I'll show you the slides where I'm talking about her case and how we used it to sell the case, but also used the same plan throughout treatment. And so hopefully by the end of these next couple videos, you feel very confident with doing setups in Mesh Mixer. Thanks for joining me today.